you guys probably think about the organization that's famous for making its jeans, but to an accountant, GAAP signifies something a little different. It stands for the Generally Accepted Accounting Principles, which are the set of accounting rules that accountants and companies here in the United States have to adhere to. But at an international level, countries around the globe have to adhere to a different set of standards, known as the International Financial Reporting Standards, or IFRS. So given the globalization of the economy in the past couple of years, there's been a really big push through the United States to converge GAAP with IFRS. Now, none of this may seem relevant to any of you guys, but we're going to be joining the professional workforce in a couple of years. And after taking a couple of accounting courses and really studying this topic, I know that converging to IFRS would definitely impact the way companies here in the United States make their financial statements, which is going to impact the decisions they make and therefore impact us as employees. So during this presentation, I'm going to talk to you guys about the definitions of GAAP and IFRS, kind of outline the nature of the similarities and the differences between the two, and then I'm going to talk to you guys about a history of the timeline of the convergence efforts here in the United States. So first and foremost, what is GAAP? GAAP is a rules-based accounting system that's mainly developed by three different organizations, which are the Securities and Exchange Commission, or the SEC, and then the private sector, which is composed of the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants, or the AICPA, and then the Financial Accounting Standards Board, or the FASB. Now, the SEC acts as the oversight and the reinforcement for the private sector because it requires that all companies that are registered with it adhere to GAAP. But it's the private sector, and most specifically FASB, that has actually been creating the rules for the past 60 years. GAAP is currently comprised of over 2,000 documents, but the FASB created what is known as the codification, which has combined all of those documents and kind of simplified it into one place so that it's easier for accountants to access and make it be found. Then you have IFRS, which is a principles-based accounting system that's developed by the International Accounting Standards Board, located in London. All companies that are registered with the European Union have to adhere to IFRS. And as you can see, all of the companies in orange are the ones that currently are using or are required to use IFRS, and then the ones in the blue are the ones that are trying to switch over to IFRS, because IFRS is obviously the one that kind of dominates the accounting standards market, and most countries kind of want there to just be one simple standard instead of everybody doing their own individual thing. The accounting and GAAP and IFRS are actually very similar because they're based on similar principles, so they have similar frameworks and they often lead to similar results. But the differences between the two arise because they have differing views on the nature of companies as well as how they deal with the details of transactions. So a perfect example and a big example of this is revenue recognition, which is outlined by this chart. GAAP recognizes revenue when it's realized and when it's earned, whereas IFRS recognizes revenue differently based on the different transactions and economic benefits that arise from those transactions. So this is important because obviously revenue is a very big thing on the financial statements. It's the first thing that goes on the income statement. So if they have different numbers for this, that means that they're going to end up having different financial statements. So why is this all important? Well, international companies like Microsoft and Coca-Cola, they all have to currently prepare two different sets of standards, which makes it very costly for them, and their accountants have to learn these different rules. So over the past couple of years, there's been a very big push for the United States to actually adopt IFRS, but most professionals are instead in support of us converging with them. So now I'm going to go over the timeline of this convergence. In September of 2002, the FASB and the IASB created the Norwalk Agreement and started creating a memorandum of understanding in which they decided that they wanted to make their individual standards more compatible with each other. Then in April 2005, the SEC's chief accountant published what is known as the roadmap, in which he predicted that foreign private investors would be using IFRS by 2009, and that actually ended up happening earlier than expected in November 2007. Then in February 2006, the FASB and the IASB published officially the Memorandum of Understanding, in which they once again wanted to combine their efforts, and they decided to do this through a series of short-term projects which were meant to reconcile the differences between these two standards, as well as create new accounting standards that were common for both of them. Then in November 2008, the SEC issued an updated roadmap in which it predicted that all companies in the United States would be using IFRS between 2014 and 2016. In 2010, the SEC released a statement of continued support for IFRS, so they said once again, we want a common accounting standard throughout the world, and we still think that IFRS is best suited for this. Then in May 2011, the SEC published a staff paper that discussed the endorsement method, which was going to slowly incorporate IFRS into GAAP. In July 2011, the SEC hosted a roundtable discussion, which is very important in its decision and discussion process, in which they talked about the pros and cons of incorporating IFRS into GAAP and how that would affect different types of companies. Then in November 2011, the SEC published 2 papers, once again, kind of officially discussing the differences between the two and the costs, how it affects different companies. But then in the spring and then through the fall of 2011, convergence schedule was delayed. So they're still talking about the differences between GAAP and IFRS and kind of trying to outline the costs and how it would affect the different companies. So overall, accounting professionals here in the United States aren't really in that big of a support of converging to IFRS because it would be very, very costly for small businesses and businesses that don't operate on an international level. It kind of seems pointless to do this. So the differences between IFRS and GAAP aren't quite enough for the accounting professionals to be in support of the amount of cost that it would cost them. But companies that operate on an international level are already converging to IFRS because it is so important for them to be kind of doing one set of standards instead of all of these different things. So it is predicted that the United States will eventually, no matter how slowly but surely, converge to IFRS because it is important for us to level the playing field. GAAP is kind of its own thing in the United States here right now, but if we want to stay competitive in the global market, we are going to have to converge to IFRS. So even though it threatens our current way of doing things, IFRS would provide a lot of opportunities for the United States to kind of be more competitive in a global market. Any questions?
As much as we want to have a universal system like this, since GAAP is more rule-based, it doesn't have a lot of, it like tries to rule, but it doesn't have room for fraud. And since FRS is more principles-based, are you worried about that?
That's what a lot of the accounting professionals have a problem with, is because since GAAP is more rules-based, it's kind of a lot more easier to follow. Either you broke the rule or you didn't break the rule. And with IFRS, there is a lot of inconsistency because its implementation and its interpretation do vary, not only from country to country right now, but from company to company in general. So if we switched over to IFRS, there is a lot more of an opportunity now